You know, when you hear the phrase the evolution debate, most of us probably think of one single big argument, but it's really not that simple at all. It's actually a whole collection of different conversations, all layered on top of each other. We're talking everything from subtle arguments over a single word to a full-blown clash of entire worldviews. So, let's peel back these layers together and really unpack what's going on.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll tackle a really common misconception about how evolution works. Then we'll dive into a fiery debate that's happening among top scientists themselves. After that, we'll get into the much bigger philosophical challenge of an accidental universe. And finally, we'll see how this whole thing builds up to a fundamental clash of worldviews.
All right, Section 1. The first debate we're looking at isn't even about whether evolution is real. Nope, it's about a very sticky and very wrong way of describing it. And this idea is so intuitive, so easy to grasp, that even the experts sometimes get caught using it.
For centuries, way before Darwin was even born, people pictured life as this great chain of being. Think of it like a ladder. You've got rocks and dirt at the bottom, then you move up through plants, then animals, and who's at the very top? Well, humans, of course, right below the angels. It's this really powerful image of progress, and this idea of higher and lower life forms still kind of haunts our language today.
Now, you'd think scientists would know better, right? And for the most part, they do. But get this, a study looked at over 67,000 scientific papers and found that just under 2% of them, we're talking over 1,500 articles, still use this outdated ladder language. And here's the kicker. The study found that the most frequent users of these terms were botanists. Apparently, it's a hard habit to break when you're talking about plants.
And this bias gets even more subtle. Just look at how we talk about animal communication. Researchers discovered that when it comes to primates, their calls are way more likely to be described with advanced words like language or elaborate. But for other animals, they often get stuck with primitive words like communication. It's not on purpose, but it creates this subtle hierarchy, with our complex human language sitting right at the top.
Okay, on to Section 2. Now we're shifting gears from a common mistake to a really fierce, fundamental disagreement between some of the heaviest hitters in evolutionary biology. This is a real battle of ideas happening right inside the scientific community about the very engine of evolution, natural selection.
So, in one corner, you've got thinkers like Steven Pinker. He argues that our most complex and amazing features, things like our eyes or our ability to use language, are complex adaptations. He means they were meticulously sculpted over millions of years by natural selection to do a very specific job. But in the other corner, you had the late great Stephen Jay Gould, who argued that many of our most human traits might just be, well, accidents.
Now, to explain what he meant, Gould borrowed a cool term from architecture, spandrels. Imagine you're in a big cathedral. When you put a circular dome on top of 4 arches, you automatically create these curved triangular spaces in the corners. They weren't part of the original plan, they're just a byproduct. But then, artists come along and fill them with beautiful mosaics. Gould said things like human language could be biological spandrels, just unintended side effects of our brains getting bigger for other reasons, that we then figured out how to use for communication.
But Pinker fires right back with this really powerful counterargument. He basically says, okay, fine, so what if it started as an accident? If that spandrel, that accidental trait, turned out to be useful for survival, you can bet natural selection would have taken over, refining it and shaping it for its new, useful purpose. In his view, the origin story doesn't matter as much as what that trait became.
Gould's colleague, a biologist named Richard Lewontin, took this whole critique even further. His point was that natural selection is an incredible optimizer. It's great at making a wing more efficient for flying. But, he argued, it can't invent the wing from scratch. And why not? Because a tiny little stub of a wing, one that's only 5% functional, gives you zero advantage. If anything, it just gets in the way.
And there's this amazing story that really brings Lewontin's point to life. Apparently, he would stand up in the middle of his Harvard lectures and just start flapping his arms to show everyone. The point being, natural selection can't help us evolve wings because we can't fly, not even a tiny bit. It can only work on something an organism is already doing. It can't make that huge leap from 0 to 1.
All right, let's move on to Section 3. We've seen how scientists can disagree with each other. But now, let's zoom way out and look at the challenge coming from outside the scientific community. These are the deep philosophical and theological arguments that question the whole foundation of the theory.
So, the commentator William Rusher suggested we rename the theory accidentalism.
And he did that to put a laser focus on what he saw as the main issue. See, the dictionary definition of evolution talks about slight variations. Rusher says the most important word, the one that should be in there, is accidental. And that one little word changes absolutely everything. It frames the entire debate as a choice between pure random chance and some kind of intelligent design.
For critics like Rusher, this whole debate about biology isn't really about biology at all. It's a proxy war. It's just one battlefield in a much, much larger conflict between a worldview that sees purpose and design in the universe and a materialistic one that sees only the cold, impersonal operation of natural laws.
And Rusher really doesn't pull any punches here. He argues that when scientists refuse to even discuss intelligent design in a science classroom by saying, well, that's just not science, they are, in his view, making a circular argument. He sees it as being intellectually dishonest because they refuse to even engage with a challenging idea.
And this brings us to our fourth and final section, the deepest layer of this whole debate. This is where we see two fundamentally different worldviews looking at the exact same world, the exact same evidence, and coming to completely opposite conclusions. This is a battle over how we even know what we know.
So to really understand the creationist critique, you first have to understand the philosophy they say is the foundation of mainstream science, naturalism. This is the core belief that the natural, observable world, the one explained by scientific laws, is all there is, period. For critics, this isn't a scientific conclusion. It's a philosophical starting point that automatically rules out any possibility of a creator before the investigation even begins.
And what's so fascinating here is how this slide lays those two worldviews out side by side. Just look at the row for coded genetic information. The creation hypothesis says it was all perfect at the beginning and has been breaking down ever since. The evolution hypothesis says it started at 0 and has slowly gotten more complex through mutations. You see? It's the same evidence, but two wildly different stories, and it all comes down to that philosophical starting point.
But then there's this other, really fascinating argument. An author named David Noble completely flips the script. He decides to use Darwin's own criteria against the worldview that evolution inspired. According to Noble, Darwin himself said survival comes down to three things: vigor, health, and happiness. So, Noble asks the simple question: how do the religious tribe and the secular tribe measure up?
And Noble actually brings data to the table for this. He points to studies suggesting that, on average, religious people consistently report being happier and less depressed. So he argues, if you use Darwin's own happiness metric, the religious worldview actually appears to be more fit for survival. It's a provocative thought.
Noble's final point really hammers this home. Citing a CIA World Factbook from 2006, he points out that self-identified atheists made up a tiny fraction of the world's population. He argues that in many places, the secular tribe is shrinking while the religious tribe is growing. And this, he says, creates a kind of Darwinian puzzle. If atheism is the most logical worldview, why does it seem to be failing the survival of the fittest test?
And all of this leaves us with one last big question. We've gone all the way from a simple debate over the word higher to this profound clash over the entire meaning of existence. At the end of the day, it seems like science is incredible at describing what is, while philosophy and religion are busy grappling with what it all means. And the question that remains is whether these two fundamental ways of understanding our universe can ever truly find a way to speak the same language.